host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. I want to thank you for joining us today. And I apologize, I don't have a guest. I actually had planned on sending in a pre-recorded interview I did with Crow, the shaman I've interviewed before. That will be ready for Jules. We'll play it next Monday. I just got super occupied. I interviewed him on Saturday and just got really busy with my family, frankly. So I don't have an interview, but I'm really glad I don't have an interview because today I really do want to talk about a few things, and I'm going to really make an effort to contain myself. I woke up this morning, as I'm wont to do since Trader Trump took over the White House, to watch the missteps that he makes on Twitter. And I about fell off my chair when I read what he wrote this morning. Literally, he called the standing senator a used whore on Twitter. Literally. And I got busy. I mean, I literally started calling the congressional offices. They're all 3 hours ahead of us. All the senators, Paul Ryan's office. Like, we have got to stop this traitor. It's bad enough that the Republicans are covering up for his business dealings with Russia. I mean, I don't think he colluded with the Russians to actually steal our elections, that he just let them do it. Kind of wink, wink, let's look the other way. There's no real proof that he could do that. But as Mueller has his tax returns, it's very evident. This is why he never released his tax returns. He's been doing business with Russia. He plans on doing business with Russia. No doubt he's making money with Russia as he's president. All of that is illegal. By the way, it's not, it's an option. There is actually a law that, you cannot make money as president of the United States with foreign powers. The reason our forefathers actually had that law in place was because foreign leaders can actually manipulate you. If you have a vested interest in doing business with them, they can blackmail you. They can do things to our country. Now, I know a lot of listeners are really fed up with this idea of country, but frankly, it's what we have. We're watching this president really demean our own country, our own government, and our own people. People that come to my show want to hear about the nuclear news and what's going on with that. And frankly, there's a lot. I'll get to that in a little while. But I am just, I called Nancy Pelosi's office and said, look, I implore you, no more business as usual. This has got to stop. We've already been knocked off the ranks of a leader of the free world. Whether that was an illusion or not, our country was seen as the leader of the free world, period. People come to America illegal because they think they have an opportunity. The reason that the illegal immigrants aren't coming here anymore is they're afraid of arrest. They're afraid of getting killed by police. This last week we saw the rounds of our police departments are now being trained, shoot to kill if you feel threatened. Like, when did that happen? Where did that come up with? And now this is a slow creep. I'm not blaming it all on Trader Trump. But I am. He does not deserve the office of the presidency. Let me read you his tweet, because he is the most despicable politician I have ever seen. He is so far worse than Nixon or Shrub. It's unbelievable. Donald Trump this morning, lightweight Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a total flunky for Chuck Schumer, and someone who would come to my office begging for campaign contributions not so long ago. And in quotes, he wrote this, and would do anything for them, unquote, and is now in the ring fighting against Trump. Very disloyal to Bill and crooked. Used. He ended it with used. He's essentially calling Senator Gillibrand a used whore. What kind of despicable character is this? Now, Senator Gillibrand is a woman that I was livid with last week. I called her office and yelled at them. I said, you know what? Making Franken resign and using him as the whipping boy for institutional misogyny is not going to stop it. And just this week, the president took aim at her in true misogynistic terms. As a woman, I have gotten accustomed to the misogyny. And if anybody out there wants to call and talk to me about this and tell me why women deserve this, or why it's okay, or why it's acceptable, the number is 718-717-8106. I'd love to have a talk with you. Because it is not. Sexual harassment and misogyny is not acceptable. It never has been. And men have really ruled with brute force, and women are not taking it. Senator Gillibrand wrote back to she tweeted, this is how demeaned the president has taken the relations between the Congress and the president. Now they have to relate to him on Twitter. You cannot silence me or the millions of women who have gotten off the sidelines to speak out about the unfitness and shame you have brought to the Oval Office. And amen to that. I mean, this man is a despicable character. And not only that, he's a despicable leader. He lies about everything. He is not responsible for the uptick in the economy. His methods, his little bits on the, he has not really made a big dent on the economy. That has come on the heels of 9 years of recovery from the economic collapse. And every economist has said that. So Trader Trump has, this is the issue. We have a man in the White House who doesn't even read. He does not read. He does not understand. He surrounded himself with the military, and frankly, that's a frightening issue. And for those of you who believe in the military, are you aware that we are filling up Africa with our soldiers and fighting at a greater level all throughout Africa? And it's not even being mentioned. It's barely mentioned on the news. Now, I'm not giving a pass to the mainstream media because they're all complicit with this traitor. They put him on the television 80 times more than they did Bernie. They're despicable the way it's all a shakedown. But this man is beyond comprehension. And I honestly do not know how anybody could support him. They think that he's going to get rid of Obamacare. He's not. Actually, if this tax, this is actually what they're doing with this quote tax bill, tax reform act, is they're ending the New Deal. Essentially, they're going to gut Social Security, every safety net, just like they did in Chile after they installed Pinochet. This is exactly what these so-called neoliberals did. America would have none of it. The Americans weren't about to do this. So they did it by force in South America. They went down there and coerce these governments to defund all of their safety nets and give them very high interest rate loans, and basically kept them in a cycle of really being indebted to the banks, which is where they're at now. And they did that to Puerto Rico, by the way, and there are still 1.5 million people in Puerto Rico mostly without clean, potable water. And I know that personally. I have a former sister-in-law who lives there, living in the city of Carolina. She and her 2 children do not have water, clean water. It comes out brown out of their pipes like it does in Flint, Michigan. So what Trump is actually really doing is he's making America poor again. He's creating a Charles Dickens state in our country on the heels of destroying our environment. And I am just flabbergasted that I hope people take to the streets. I guarantee you on January 20th, I'm taking to the streets. That's impeach Trump day, man, for me. This man is a traitor. And right now he's working on trying to close down the Mueller investigation because he knows they're getting close to him. So the Republicans are clicking their heels, Sieg Heil. You know, it was actually the parliament that allowed Hitler to get and Mussolini. Mussolini also had a parliament that stood behind him. So dictators always have people behind them being complicit. And it is the silence of the complicity of the people that are allowing it that is really the crime. We can expect evil people to conduct evil. But the good, honorable people cannot just be terrified or cannot just go along to get along. We have got to speak out. In fact, that's what started me speaking out when I saw George Bush Jr. steal the election in 2000. That just dumbfounded me. Not one, and frankly, since then, our country has taken a steady nosedive. I took an international relations class and a comparative politics class where both of those professors actually implied that 9/11 was a real event by so-called terrorists, when there is overwhelming, astounding evidence that it was an inside job and done by people within our own government. And frankly, I believe they did it to roll out the Unpatriot Act, to take away our rights. Not just to terrify people, but to take away our rights and reset everything. What do you think mission accomplished meant? Mission accomplishment, everything's in place. They can't stop us now, boys. Really, and that's where they've been. They propped up Trump, and man, he's the wrecking ball crew. But this business of being an open misogynist, despicable character that he is, I hope Ivanka Trump comes out and outs her pedophile father, because frankly, I saw a picture of him getting on an airplane with Bill Clinton and 2 young women with Brian Epstein on Brian Epstein's plane. The guy is not only a misogynist, but probably a pedophile. I mean, I saw him boarding a plane with 2 young women, probably about 14 years old. Now, that picture's been scrubbed from the internet, so if you get busy trying to find it, if you can find it, please send it to me. It was all over the globe. It was all over British papers about 4 years ago when it came out. But this is despicable. And I don't know what it's going to take for Americans to stand up against this type of tyranny. Because that's where we're headed, folks. We are headed towards open totalitarian system. Traitor Trump wants to develop his own little secret security guards to go out against people who are protesting against him. I mean, it's beyond comprehension that this is where America is, and that people will defend a traitor like that. My phone number is 718-717 if anybody wants to call and talk to me. I'm 15 minutes in. I'm going to get off this because, I mean, honestly, push my button on this institutional misogyny. And, you know why? Because I'm a woman, because I've been experiencing it my entire life. People look at me and value me about how I look. They don't do that to men, actually, not like that. They don't call you a used whore like this guy did, and it just is acceptable. I heard on the news this morning, right afterwards, I turned on the box to see what the 3 stations were saying about it. There was a guy from Newsmax, the owner of Newsmax, and Mario Cuomo's brother, who's on CNN. They repeated the president's tweets. They're like, well, we don't know what that means, that she would like do anything for it. And gee, what does he mean by that used? We know exactly what it means. It means she's a used whore. She's used up. She's taken up her value. It's incomprehensible that people are going to allow that piece of scum to inhabit our White House for even 24 hours more. He is a despicable character who deserves to be arrested and kicked out of the White House. Okay, so I'm going to move on. I promised myself I wouldn't talk more than 15 minutes about that jerk. So thank you, lovelies, for putting up with that. It's really frustrating. So I'm going to read you a poem because I like to read poems, from my Lao Tzu. I really like Lao Tzu. So there's one that I haven't really practiced reading, but I'm going to read this one to you anyways. I think I've read it to you before. The breath of life moves through a deathless valley of mysterious motherhood, which conceives and bears the universal seed. The seeming of a world never to end, breath for men to draw from as they will. The more they take of it, the more remains. So let us remember that, the more we go on, the more we can go on. And the more we have to really focus our energy on the higher vibrations, not get stuck with the trash where Donald Trump wants to bring us into the gutter, the despicable character that he is. Okay, I wanted to read to you, though, some of the things that he's doing to our country. Beyond chopping up Bear Ears Monument and giving it to the uranium companies, that's all native lands. He's just decided I'm taking the native lands once again. The United States government taking native lands and giving it to uranium companies to mine. Beyond that, I'm sure many of you know about this. This is what this says. The EPA to drop a new source review enforcement provision. So they are not going to be enforcing. In fact, there's been several stories on the news that says with the rollback of the regulations that Scott Pruitt has done, they're not even enforcing the current laws that we have on the books. So people need to protect themselves, and they need to get actively engaged because these people are actually going to intentionally harm us. They know the harm they're doing. So if you think that World War III has not started, it's on, baby. They are on their roads. And frankly, I hold Congress accountable for this because it is Congress's job to stop this. And Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chucky Schumer, those guys really need to stop. How much money do they need? Is it worth destroying our earth? Is it worth destroying everything that we have? Department of Energy to fill a second radioactive tunnel at Hanford. A second. Remember Heidi Lambert? She said, look, it's gonna happen. It's guacamole. So it's whack-a-mole. KUOW reports the Department of Energy will fill in a second tunnel packed with radioactive equipment at Hanford, a largely decommissioned nuclear production complex in eastern Washington along the Columbia River. A largely decommissioned. The move comes after a first tunnel, which is also filled with radioactive materials, collapsed last spring. After the collapse was discovered, the Department of Energy initially threw a tarp over it. And then 6 months later, contractors filled it in with truckloads of grout. Yeah, so for that 6 months, that tarp really worked to protect the people up there and the environment. This is so outrageous. While this is in no way a long-term solution for serious radioactive waste problem, Hanford, it is the largest waste site in the Western Hemisphere. The soil is contaminated, the groundwater is contaminated, it's all contaminated. The DOE says filling in the tunnel minimized the risk of radioactive leaks. And you should trust the DOE because Dancing with the Stars alum Rick Perry now runs the department. So check this out. The groundwater is contaminated. And where do you think that groundwater goes, folks? Let me tell you, not only does it go to Western Washington, but it goes right up to Seattle. From KUOW, Tunnel 2 is a lot larger than Tunnel 1, nearly 1,700 feet long and holding 28 rail cars containing old contaminated equipment from a plutonium processing plant. Crews expect to start grouting up the tunnel before next fall. Critics, including Northwest tribes, have said that grouting closed these massive tunnels essentially make them permanent radioactive waste dumps. Ding, 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 ding. They have no intention of doing anything. Back to the story. Tunnel 2 was built in the early 1960s and has had known structural problems. Government officials worry that the tunnel is under strain and that another collapse could end up a plume of radioactive dust. And there are other concerns. As reporter Michael Lewis detailed in an astounding Vanity Fair feature on the DOE under President Trump, and he puts into parentheses, seriously, read this piece. We'll move on to that next if I have time. From 1943 until 1987, as the Cold War was ending and Hanford closed its reactors, the place created 2/3 of the plutonium in the United States arsenal. Let me read that again. From 1943 until 1987, as the Cold War was ending and Hanford closed its reactors, the place created 2/3 of the plutonium in the United States arsenal, a total of 70,000 nuclear weapons since 1945. You'd like to think that if anyone had known the environmental consequences of plutonium, or if anyone could have been certain that the uranium bomb would work, they would never have done that here. Plutonium is hard to produce, said McWilliams, and hard to get rid of. By the late 1980s, the state of Washington had gained some clarity on just how hard and began to negotiate with the U.S. government. In the ensuing agreement, the United States promised to return Hanford to a condition where, as McWilliams put it, kids can eat dirt. That will never happen. When I asked him to guess what it would cost to When I asked him to guess what it would cost to return Hanford to the standards now legally required, he said, "A century and $1 billion," and that was a conservative effort. Now, instead of producing nuclear weapons, Hanford mostly cleans it up. 10% of DOE's annual budget, or $3 billion a year, goes to Hanford, where thousands of people are still employed in the cleanup. Ironically, Trump has promised to slash the DOE's budget, and yet the Tri-Cities still voted for him by 25 points. And while Trump dismantles the federal government, and Rick Perry still hasn't figured out what the department under his watch actually does, a massive underground glacier of radioactive sludge is moving slowly but relentlessly towards the Columbia River, Lewis writes. And from there it moves west, directly headed towards Portland. Lord. We are in a really sad state of affairs, and we're in a sad state of affairs because people have given up being engaged. That's why. Because, as Dave said yesterday, we need to be superheroes for 8 minutes a day. And that means figure out what your hot button is and get actively engaged, because this stuff is not going away. So here is the story by Michael Lewis, dated July 26, 2017. It's in the Vanity Fair, under the Hive section of Vanity Fair under Politics. The title is, Why the Scariest Nuclear Threat May Be Coming from Inside the White House. No kidding. Hold on just a second, folks. Apologize for that. Donald Trump's Secretary of Energy, Rick Perry, once campaigned to abolish the $30 billion agency that he now runs, which oversees everything from our nuclear arsenal to the electrical grid. The department's budget is now on the chopping block. But does anyone in the White House really understand what the Department of Energy actually does? And what a horrible risk it would be to ignore its extraordinary life or death responsibilities? One morning, on the morning after the election, November 9th, 2016, the people who ran the U.S. Department of Energy turned up in their offices and waited. They had cleared 30 desks and freed up 30 parking spaces. They didn't know exactly how many people they'd host that day, but whoever won the election would surely be sending a small army into the Department of Energy and every other federal agency. The morning after he was elected president, 8 years earlier, Obama had sent 30 to 40 people into the Department of Energy. The Department of Energy staff planned to deliver the same talks from the same 5-inch thick 3-ring binders with the Department of Energy seal on them to the Trump people as they would have given to the Clinton people. Nothing had to be changed, said one former Department of Energy staffer. They'd be done always with the same intention. Either party wins, nothing changes. By the afternoon, the silence was deafening. Day one, we're ready to go, says a former senior official White House official. Day two, it was, maybe they'll call us. Teams were going around. Have you heard from them? Recalls another staffer who was preparing for the transition. Have you gotten anything? I haven't gotten anything. The election happened, remembered Elizabeth Sherwood Randall, then Deputy Secretary of the DOE, and he won, and there was radio silence. We were prepared for the next day, and nothing happened. Across the federal government, the Trump people weren't found anywhere. Allegedly, between the election and the inauguration, not a single Trump representative set foot inside the Department of Agriculture, for example. The Department of Agriculture has employees or contractors in every county in the United States, and the Trump people seem simply to be ignoring the place. Where did they turn up inside the federal government? Where they did turn up inside the federal government, they appeared confused and unprepared. A small group attended a briefing at the State Department, for instance, only to learn that the briefings they needed to hear were classified. None of the Trump people had security clearance, or for that matter, had any experience in foreign policy, and so they weren't allowed to receive the education. On his visits to the White House soon after the election, son-in-law, Jared Kushner, expressed surprise that so much of its staff seemed to be leaving. It was like he thought it was a corporate acquisition or something, said an Obama White House staffer. They thought everyone just stayed. Even in normal times, the people who take over the United States government can be surprisingly ignorant about it. As a longtime career civil servant in the DOE who has watched 4 different administrations show up to run the place, put it, you always have the issue of maybe they don't understand what the department does. To address the problem, a year before he left office, Barack Obama had instructed a lot of knowledgeable people across his administration, including 50 or so inside the DOE, to gather the knowledge that his successor would need in order to understand the government he or she was taking charge of. The Bush administration had done the same for Obama, and Obama had been grateful for their efforts. He told his staff that their goal was to ensure that an even smoother transition of power than the Bush people had achieved. That proved to be a huge undertaking. Thousands of people inside the federal government had spent the better part of a year drawing a vivid picture of it for the benefit of the new administration. The United States government might be the most complicated organization on the face of the earth. 2 million federal employees take orders from 4,000 political appointees. Dysfunction is baked into the structure of the thing. The subordinates know that their bosses will be replaced every 4 years and that the direction of their enterprises might change overnight with an election or a war or some other political event. Still, many of our problems of our government grapples with aren't particularly ideological. The Obama people tried to keep their political ideology out of the briefings. You don't have to agree with our politics, as the former senior White House official put it. You just have to understand how we got here. Zika, for instance, you might disagree with how we approached it. You don't have to agree. You just have to understand why we approached it that way. Hold on. How to stop a virus, how to take a census, how to determine if some foreign country is seeking to obtain a nuclear weapon or if North Korean missiles can reach Kansas City. These are enduring technical problems. The people appointed by a newly elected president to solve these problems have roughly 75 days to learn from their predecessors. After the inauguration, a lot of deeply knowledgeable people will scatter to the four winds and be forbidden by law from initiating any contact with their replacements. The period between the election and the inauguration has the feel of an AP chemistry class to which half the students have turned up late and are forced to scramble to grab the notes taken by the other half before the final. It's a source of a lot of dysfunction in the government, says Max Steyer, who runs a bipartisan partnership for public service, which over the past decade has become perhaps the world's expert on U.S. presidential transitions. The wheel comes off the bus at the start of the trip, and you never get anywhere. 2 weeks after the election, the Obama people inside the DOE read the newspapers that Trump had created a small landing team. According to several DOE employees, this was led by and mostly consisted of a man named Tom Pyle, president of the American Energy Alliance, which upon inspection proved to be a Washington, D.C. propaganda machine funded with millions of dollars from ExxonMobil and Koch Industries. Pyle himself had served as Koch Industries lobbyist and ran a side business writing editorials attacking the DOE's attempt to reduce the dependence on the American economy on carbon. Pyle says that his role on the landing team was voluntary, adding that he could not disclose who appointed him due to a confidentiality agreement. The people running the DOE were taken by surprise, were then seriously surprised. We first learned of Pyle's appointment on the Monday of Thanksgiving week, recalls the DOE Chief of Staff Kevin Knobloch, Knobloch. We sent word to him that the secretary and his deputy would meet with him as soon as possible. He said he would like that, but he could not do it until after Thanksgiving. Sorry, can't talk to you right now. This is stunning. A month after the election, Pyle arrived for a meeting at the Department of Energy, Ernest Moniz, Deputy Secretary Sherwood Randall, and Knobloch. Moniz is a nuclear physicist, then on leave from MIT, who had served as Deputy Secretary during the Clinton administration and is widely viewed as by many Republicans as understanding and loving the DOE better than any person on earth. Pyle appeared to have no interest in anything he had to say. He did not seem motivated to spend a lot of time understanding the place. He did not bring a pencil or a piece of paper. He didn't ask questions. He spent an hour. That was it. He never asked to meet with us again. Afterward, Knobloch suggested that Pyle visit one day each week until the inauguration, and that Pyle agreed to do it, but that he never showed up, instead attending a half a dozen meetings or so with others. It was a head-scratcher, said Knobloch. It's a $30 billion a year organization with about 110,000 employees. Industrial sites all across the country. Very serious stuff. If you're going to run it, why wouldn't you want to know something about it? There was a reason Obama had appointed nuclear physicists to run it. It, like the problems it grappled with, was technical and complicated. Moniz helped lead the U.S. negotiations with Iran precisely because he knew which parts of their nuclear energy program they must surrender if they were to be prevented from obtaining a nuclear weapon. For a decade before Knobloch joined the DOE in June of 2013, he had served as president of the Union of Concerned Scientists. I had worked closely with DOE throughout my career, he said. I thought I knew and understood the agency. But when I came in, I thought, holy cow. Deputy Secretary Elizabeth Sherwood Randall spent her 30-year career reducing the world's supply of weapons of mass destruction. She led the U.S. mission to remove chemical weapons from Syria. But like everyone else who came in at the DOE, she'd grown accustomed to no one knowing what the department actually did. When she called back home back in 2013 to tell them that President Obama had nominated her to be second in command of the place, her mother said, "Well, darling, I have no idea what the Department of Energy does, but you've always had a lot of energy, so I'm sure you're perfect for the role." To the mother. The Trump administration had no clearer idea what she did with her day than her mother. And yet, according to Sherwood Randall, they were certain they didn't need to hear anything she had to say before they took over her job. Pyle, according to the DOE officials, eventually sent over a list of 74 questions he wanted answered to. His list consisted some of the topics covered in material briefings, but also a few not. Here's a sample. Can you provide a list of all Department of Energy employees or contracts who have attended an interagency working group on the social cost of carbon meeting? Can you provide a list of department employees and contractors who attended any of the conference on the parties under the United Nations framework on the Convention of Climate Change in the last 5 years? So they want to know who believes in climate change, I guess. Wow, that's another thing. I'm going to finish this article and then it's not much longer, folks. In a nutshell, that was the spirit of the Trump enterprise. It reminded me of McCarthyism, said Sherwood Randall. No kidding. It says a great deal about the mindset of career civil servants that the DOE employee in charge of overseeing the transition set out to answer even the most offensive questions. Her attitude, like the attitude of the permanent staff, was, "We are meant to serve our elected masters, however odious they might be." When the questions got leaked to the press, she was really upset, says the former DOE staffer. The only reason that the DOE did not serve up the names of the people who had educated themselves about climate change and thus exposed themselves to the wrath of the new administration was that the old administration was still in charge. "We aren't answering these questions," Secretary Moniz had said to them simply. After Pyle's list of questions wound up in Bloomberg News, the Trump administration disavowed them, but a signal had been sent out. "We don't want you to help us understand. We want to find out who you are and punish you." Pyle vanished from the scene. According to a former Obama official, he was replaced by a handful of young ideologues who called themselves the Beachhead Team. "They mainly ran around the building insulting people," says a former Obama official. "There was a mentality that everything that the government does is stupid and bad, and that the people are stupid and bad," says another. That's kind of the running theme of the entire Trump administration. They allegedly demanded to know the names and salaries of the 20 highest paid people in the national science labs overseen by the DOE. They'd eventually, according to former DOE staffers, delete the contact list with the email addresses of all DOE-funded scientists. Wow! Apparently to make it more difficult for them to communicate with one another. "These people were insane," said a former DOE staffer. "They weren't prepared. They didn't know what they were doing." We tried desperately to prepare them, said Tarek Shah, Chief of Staff for the DOE's $6 billion basic science program. But that required them to show up and bring qualified people. But they didn't. They didn't ask for even an introductory briefing. Like, what do you do? The Obama people did what they could to preserve the institution's understanding of itself. We were prepared for them to start wiping out documents, said Shaw. So we prepared a public website to transfer the stuff onto, if need be. There was one concrete action the Trump transition team took before Inauguration Day to attempt to clear the DOE and other federal agencies of people appointed by Obama. Even here, it exhibited a bizarre ham-handedness. For instance, according to the Washington Post, the Trump team contacted the Inspector General in at least a handful of cabinet departments to indicate that they would soon be removed from their post, a break from bipartisan tradition of letting inspectors stay in place on their jobs as long as they are willing. After some IGs protested, a more senior member of the Trump transition team ordered a new round of phone calls within a day to rest assured the Inspector Generals they would not be forced from their posts. However, in a statement to Vanity Fair, DOE spokesperson Felicia M. Jones wrote that the acting Inspector General, April Stevenson, would remain in her position for as long as requested to do so by the Trump administration. Oh man, this thing goes on and on and on. I'm not going to continue reading it, but you guys get the gist. I mean, this is a very lengthy article. It still goes on. I don't think I'd have enough time to finish reading the whole thing. Seriously, but it is worth reading. Go to vanityfair.com and just type in Department of Energy in the search box and you'll probably find it. This really speaks to how they're systematically eliminating our government. And I know a lot of people think that our government is a big fat cash cow, which it is. But we have a lot of really serious issues. Do you want the brownfields and the, fuse wrap sites all around the country to be not funded by the government? You want us to sell them to private industry like Republic Services and allow them to handle it? I don't think so. I mean, we're sending our soldiers over to war to, use them for cannon fodder so that we can get their minerals. And they're underfunding the DOE and not enforcing the EPA rules. It is beyond comprehension what they're doing to our government. And it's not just our government. They're doing it to us. Okay, here's another little story. I see I have about 15 minutes left, and I am going to read this one. Radioactive leaks continue at Illinois nuclear power plants. Well, surprise, surprise, because this leaking nuclear power plants are the very same ones, the Braidwood ones, that the Environmental Legal Defense Fund worked with the United States, with the state of Illinois government to keep these power plants open. This is posted November 19th. Let's see how long it is. Not very. Radioactive waste continues to pour from Exelon's Illinois nuclear power plants more than a decade after the discovery of chronic leaks led to a national outrage. A $1.2 million government settlement and a company vow to guard against future accidents. An investigation of a government watchdog group found. Since 2007, there have been at least 35 reported leaks, spills, or other accidental releases in Illinois of water contaminated with radioactive tritium, a byproduct of nuclear power plant production and carcinogenic at high levels. No fines were issued for the accidents, all of which were self-reported by the company. No fines. That's thanks to the Price-Anderson Act, folks. The most recent leak of 35,000 gallons occurred over 2 weeks in May and June in Exelon Braidwood plant, southwest of Chicago. The same facility was the focus of a community panic in the mid-2000s after a series of accidents stirred debate over the safety of aging in nuclear power facilities. Oh, Lord, I'm going to skip down. It's a long one. Again, These are not short articles. I'm grateful for that because they actually tell us the information. So let's see what they found. These are their findings. The BGA investigation found that of the 35 documented incidents, 27 occurred at Dresden, following the 2014 leak, which emanated from an underground storage tank. Exelon asked a state inspector whether the public would have access to the incident report under the Open Records Law, a report showed. We're on a need-to-know basis. They don't want us to know. Let's see. On an NRC report in the 2007 Quad Cities leak, noted radiation levels went way beyond that seen anywhere else in the industry, and the plant estimated the leak had been radioactive for years before it was discovered. In 2010, Exelon's Marseille generating plant in LaSalle County reported a spill from a storage tank initially estimated at more than 150 gallons, but later classified as unknown. Groundwater tritium tests later showed the levels 59 times the EPA's drinking water limit. Exelon said no tritium left the plant's boundary, but records show the plant workers continued to monitor a body of highly contaminated groundwater sitting on a plant property at least 5 years after the incident. In 2009, Dresden reported another hole in the storage tank, which led to a leak of at least as much, 1 million liters, that's 272,000 gallons of radioactive water. On-site groundwater testing showed levels of tritium 160 times higher than allowed by federal drinking water standards. That blows me away. And that is at the Braidwood Nuclear Generating Station in Braceville, Illinois. And we have elected officials who say nothing about this. Nothing. They act as if it's okay. And now we have an EPA who is just like opening the floodgates. I pulled up a story really quick, you guys. I thought I'd update you. Yesterday on the show, Dave and I were talking about those children at Fukushima. It's a really sad story. It's very, very, very sad. This is a really quick, several paragraph story. This is written in the Mancini, Japan's national daily since 1922. It's Mancini, Mainichi, Mainichi, I guess. Nearly 80% of the respondents in a survey by a group supporting children diagnosed with thyroid cancer in the wake of Fukushima nuclear disaster say they remain worried about cancer, despite the prognosis for those who receive appropriate treatment being good. The survey was conducted by 3.11 Fund for Children with Thyroid Cancer, an independent not-for-profit organization providing support for child patients of thyroid cancer and their families. It was sent in August to 67 households of people who were living in Fukushima Prefecture at the time of the outbreak of the disaster at the Fukushima No. 1 nuclear power plants in 2011, and whose medical expenses the fund helped to cover. This is interesting because as a Japanese, they can only say Fukushima No. 1. A total of 52 households responded, a response rate of about 78%. 12 of the responses had received treatment themselves, while 7 were fathers and 33 were mothers of those who had been treated. Of the 40 respondents, or 77%, they said they remained worried. When asked specifically what they worried about, 23 said they were worried about a relapse. 9 said each cited a metastasis, and health status in general, while 5 said that they were worried about pregnancy and childbirth and finding a job and working. Among children, some worried about cancer testing being scaled back. A total of 28 respondents called for the status quo to be maintained, while another 17 respondents called for the testing system to be enhanced. None said it should be downsized. Excessive diagnosis has been blamed in the past few years for a large number of thyroid cancer patients in the wake of the nuclear disaster. But when given space to write their own opinions, some respondents were supportive of testing from the perspective of early detection of cancer. It's better than finding out too late. And if a person has cancer, they'll feel better if it's proved. The fund's representative director, Hisako Sekiyama, commented, "There is a need to listen to what the afflicted people and their families want and to hear what problems they are facing." You think? This is just so outrageous. I'm just heartbroken. And I don't think I'll have a chance to read this entire thing, but people do need to know about this. The U.S. restarts its nuclear testing facility in Idaho after 23 years. This was printed in the Idaho State Journal on November 15th. So I'm going to read just a little bit of this. Federal officials have restarted an eastern Idaho nuclear testing facility amidst efforts to boost the nation's nuclear power generating capacity and possibly reduce concerns about nuclear power safety. Possibly? What are you talking about? The U.S. Department of Energy said the facility at Idaho National Laboratory, about 50 miles west of Idaho Falls, began operating Tuesday for the first time since it went on standby status in 1994. It went well, said John Baumgartner, director of the laboratory's transient testing program. The reactor and the facility as a whole, as well as our trained personnel, all performed as expected. Testing of the facility's equipment began Tuesday. Nuclear fuel testing is expected to begin next year. I can't believe we're doing this. Listen to how they end it. One of the major reasons is that nuclear is so environmentally friendly on the carbon side of things, said Blackman. This is always what they talk about. There's no carbon from nuclear. Well, there's no carbon while nuclear is running, but there's plenty of carbon in making the nuclear power plants, in maintaining the nuclear power plants, and then in perpetuity managing its horrendous toxic waste. Who thinks of these things? Who allows it? What kind of thinking? These are people that aren't even thinking. They're not even really responding. I don't know, folks. This is just so outrageous. I mean, I started my day just completely blown away by Trader Trump. I just am blown away by the level of maliciousness that man is putting us all through, frankly. I mean, it's incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible that our government is actually refusing to impeach this guy. I mean, there is absolutely no way he should be allowed in the White House. Rick Perry should not even be allowed near the Department of Energy. We have brownfields, we have fuse wrap sites, we have horrendous places that need to be taken care of that are not going to be taken care of because these people have no interest in helping. None. So I'm going to read to you a little thing about herbs from the lungs, because I don't know about you guys, but where I live, it's weird. It's like all day long we're like in a fog. It's like, I think that they're geoengineering the entire West Coast to like torture us. That's what I think. But there's things that you can do to help your respiratory system, to help your entire system. One of those things you can do, I know for a fact, is take turmeric with a pinch of pepper. Always add pepper to it. It helps it work. But these are the herbs that will help your lungs with respiratory health. Is eucalyptus, lungwort, Lungwort. You can get all of these oregano, eating oregano, but you can also take a tincture of oregano, so that helps. Plantain leaf, elecampane. I have no idea what this is. Elecampane. Elecampane. I have never heard of it. Lobelia, I know that one works really great. I've taken that myself. Chaparral, peppermint, and osha root. So it's really important for us to think about how we're going to continue and move forward in our lives and live healthfully. We've got a variety of stuff going on right now. We have basically our structure of government being undermined by Congress. I posted a story on my Facebook page the other day, and I didn't pull it up. I didn't think about it, but Eric Prince basically sat before Congress and told them to go F themselves, essentially. They were asking him questions. As it turns out, President Barack Obama, gave Blackwater a no-bid contract in 2011, the story read. $9 billion for running a drug trade to protect our country for the war on drugs, to Eric Prince, a known murderer. So somehow the military, Obama's military, and I don't know if Obama knew about this, but Obama's military granted Eric Prince a $9 billion contract. So when Congress recently had him in here asking him about his connection to Russia, which evidently there's some connection to him in Russia, he basically looked at him and said, you're wasting my time and I need to leave. I've been sitting here long enough. I came here to placate you. Literally said those words, I'm here to placate you. I need to leave. And got up and left. And he was not arrested. In former times, the Republican Party would have had that guy arrested. He was not arrested. He was allowed to walk out the door and be a free man while his sister is destroying our nation's schools. I mean, I honestly do not get these Republican people where they decide that we don't need to have a government. What do they think? They're just going to let the banks run our country? They're going to let the corporations decide where to put stuff? Give all this nuclear waste to people? What are they going to do without the Department of Energy or the EPA? We're going to have, literally, we will have children dying again from being toxic fumes in tunnels. As it is, our children don't even have half the clean environment we had as children. I guess what I'm doing is encouraging people to stand up, get engaged, get a printout of the Congress, get a printout of the congressional phone numbers. You can go onto the website, senate.gov and house.gov, or I guess you go congress.gov, and you can get a printout of all of your elected officials. And you can call them on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week. Poke them in the eye. Don't let them feel comfortable. And don't be afraid that they're going to, look, they're already spying on all of us. They're taking away the internet. I mean, the net neutrality thing, people need to be calling that phone number. I mean, they're going to do what they want to do anyways. So we might as well not let them be comfortable. I mean, this is why I like that group, Pussy Riots. They're like, yeah, Putin, you're going to destroy whatever liberty we were taking away. We're going to protest. And if we have to sit in jail, we will. So we got to put our courage feet on, you guys. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed Jerome's show in the next couple of days. We'll talk to you guys, I guess, next Tuesday. I'm going to play Crow's show next Monday. We really appreciate you guys hanging in there. Put your courage feet on. Stand up for our country. Take care.